not only the lecture itself, but perhaps even more the introduction, which I enjoyed very much. I have quite a lot of comments, but I'm sure that the audience wants to participate.
It is very interesting your idea about the effects of Wittgenstein reception, Wittgenstein's reception, and what different kinds of families of interpreters have done to the real apprehension of the task with which Wittgenstein was implicated. Perhaps the interpretation as an effort to understand what we are reading in front of us sometimes loses this capacity, this ability of recognizing this compromise, this tackle with problems, which is so pregnant, so strong in Wittgenstein. And you have used a term, I guess it was the term domestication.
Yes.
There is a kind of domestication when the authors began to have more texts about themselves than the texts they have written themselves. I think we are under this weight. It's very hard to get free of the series of interpretations and the families of interpretations, but at the same time we cannot ignore them. But I agree in principle with you that it is our duty when we try to understand an author, a philosopher as Wittgenstein, to do some kind of epoche regarding the interpretation that are fixed already, and they are believed as true indications about the author. This is one aspect I would like to stress. The other aspect is the relationship with Socrates. You know better than me, there's lots of difference between Wittgenstein and Socrates. Socrates, it's true when people are already lost in the sense they are not alive anymore, we can say anything about them. It's true. But in the case, they are images for us. But in the case of Socrates, it is really an image we have. Wittgenstein, we have letters, we have Tagebücher, we have his writings. And this is a very big difference for the basis of a comparison between them. One is very real, the other one has a reality from Plato and from others who lived at the same time. But we have a transmission. It's like a transmission. We have an image of a transmission. And I think in Wittgenstein we cannot find irony. It's hard to find humor, yes, but not irony. And it is the cruelest side of Socrates. It is irony, because he looks to the others as he was a sage to the others, but he is laughing at the others, at this belief. He's not a sage. But at the same time, he knows something more than the other do. He knows that he knows nothing. In case of Wittgenstein, I don't know if he has this kind of awareness. He doesn't, for me, seems not to me that he thinks he does not know anything. He has studied lots of things. He's not interested in these things as a philosopher. No, yeah, he is interested. He has interest in these things as a philosopher. For instance, mathematics. There is interested in mathematics as a philosopher, not as a mathematician. And in this point, I see a very deep affinity with Socrates. But in other aspects, I cannot see very clear the affinities. Socrates is a personnage, a literary personnage. And he does not act the same way in all the pieces. It's very different. He has many masks.
Okay,
I think it's very interesting. I think your point is, well, what you have said is very, very interesting.
I'll do one thing. It's really, for me, in the comparison, it's quite important that that I take my clues to Socrates from Plastos, but the radical at Plastos saying that it's really only the two first parts of the apology that we need. Well, we don't need much of the Socrates, we need the two first parts of the apology, and whatever is supported by Xenophanes as well. And I think we find everything we need for the Wittgenstein Sextus-Socrates comparison there. I just give you one example, which I think is a very important example. The whole thing that philosophy should be oral, and in Wittgenstein's case as well. I mean, he did not publish.
Yeah.
I mean, I've written a piece I sent you before, and I've been thinking, why did he not publish? And I think it has to do with that he was committed not for any personal idiosyncratic reason, but because of his perception of philosophy, he was like Socrates committed to the idea that philosophy really needs the oral communication. And that is because the connection between will and argument, which is such a big thing in Wittgenstein's philosophy, that connection can only really be tested in oral communication between people who know each other, who share lives. And that's why I don't really agree that irony is so important in Socrates. I think it's much overrated. I think the important thing in Socrates, and this is really a point from Gregory Vlastos' book on Socrates, but I do different, I interpret them, the details are different. But sincerity, earnestness, is much more important than irony. And if there's one thing that they share is the emphasis that we be sincere. And then we can have our jokes, because jokes may be what we need to be sincere. Because only when we're sincere, it can be the intrinsic link between will and argument being preserved. And what they do then is Socrates and Wittgenstein both develop different techniques for conversation between equals in which will and argument can remain connected. There's, I discussed this in the paper. Let me just say one interesting thing. Well, I think that the hugest difference, the biggest difference I see between Socrates and Wittgenstein is in the kind of hope they have. That I think Socrates really dies for his claim that without the kind of examination of self and others that philosophical conversation enables, without that, human life is not worth living. This is his message. And so he's really a guy with a message that our lives are miserable and not worth living unless we engage in this kind of conversation. Wittgenstein sent off some of the best people to learn to philosophy, do something different. And I think it's because there's been 2,500 years almost between. And there's a disappointment. I think that's Dostoevsky's impact on Wittgenstein. That there's a disappointment with the liberating force of this conversation. That Wittgenstein himself could not live without philosophy. But it's also the Christian influence that Wittgenstein is that much of a Christian and that little of a Greek that he wouldn't say about other people that your life is not worth living, in the way Socrates said. See, in the promise, Wittgenstein would say maybe philosophy is the most important thing, but not for everyone. Or who am I to judge? And I think in that, on that point, in the moral, in this sort of, in the idea of the community of people who need philosophy, I think there's a huge difference between, which somehow I still grapple with understanding. So this I wanted to mention. There's lots of things to say more, but it's a beautiful topic. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Just a footnote about the issue of Europe versus the written. There's quite a literature about,
Yes.
let's say, the resistance, Socrates' resistance to write. And in fact, Plato does write on behalf of Socrates, although he kept saying that he too was somehow opposed to the lack of transparency inherent to the oral expression. In fact, this discussion is a book about computers and computer communication nowadays, and there's a retrospect about all these trade-off, things you win, gain, things you lose when you opt from the oral and the written, until Habermas and his utopia of transparent ideal communication, which is the idea about keeping dialoguing until all clarity has been made through. It is interesting, this aspect, which also apparently involves Wittgenstein too, who was also resistant to publishing, and according to some authors, he took minutes to sometimes in his classes to finish one word, and was elaborating mentally the word before speaking it out for minutes. It's what Gellman calls the conspicuous absence of authors like Wittgenstein. Just
but interesting that you mentioned Habermas. I come from Habermas. I was with him in the 80s in Frankfurt. And I still read everything he writes, which is a bit too much. I'm sorry. I still read everything by Habermas. I mean, I think there is an interesting connection between Habermas and Socrates and Wittgenstein in this idea that the two concepts, that the best use of reason implies a commitment to democratic politics. I think that's it's somehow almost strange that this is kind of minority position. I think it makes lots of sense, and then I think that it's sad. I have this reading of the relation between critical theory and Wittgenstein that it's really Carlo Apel, who in 1960, when he comes to Kiel as a young professor, he reads Heidegger's Wittgenstein, and he reads Wittgenstein very closely, and he comes out with this, which is a very sophisticated, but still a relativistic reading of Wittgenstein. And therefore, Wittgenstein gets lost to critical theory, both in France and in Germany, I think, because they all get used to the idea that, oh, he's some kind of, and when he comes back as a postmodern relativist. And what you lose is that you can really, I think, you can really argue better. I mean, you can improve on the Frankfurt idea, which actually Derrida in his late life agreed with. You can improve on the Frankfurt idea that democracy and reason are intrinsically connected. You can improve on that idea by going to Wittgenstein and Socrates. So I think many of the critiques, the more cynical, the Chantamouf critique of Habermas, the whole new left which critiques Habermas for not taking, the critique of Habermas is that he doesn't take difference seriously enough. He doesn't take take conflict seriously enough. I think all that's a very superficial critique of Habermas, but he's vulnerable to that critique because his underpinnings of the theory of cognitive reason is based on the idea of the transcendental argument. And I think transcendental argument, I think there Rorty and Quine and others are correct, that the idea that we can have a transcendental foundation for a theory of meaning, I think that idea doesn't really carry. And so Habermas withdraws the weak transcendentalism, and then he becomes easy prey for all kinds of Rortian irony. So I do agree with you that there's an important connection between the topic of democracy in Habermas, the topic of democracy in Socrates, and a very strange lacuna, a very sad lack in Wittgenstein's interest and his lack of interest in political issues and his lack of interest in democracy, which I think are due to I mean, I have a theory of this, but I think it's due to sad circumstances in his life. Austrian soldiers, young man, elite background. Wittgenstein never had access to democracy as a source of hope. His life destroyed that opportunity for him in a way which creates big difficulties for us in understanding what I think is the enemy, the idea that philosophy is conversation with equals. Conversation with equals is the foundation for democratic politics. So that's thanks for mentioning these things.
Any other question? So if my good friends before just thinking again.
I will tell you.
You can do it now. If my good friend Rui agrees, perhaps you could make a 10 minutes